Okay, so back in 3rd Age Reforged again, and we're going to take a look at Dale in their current form. So I'll show you the units in person this time, I think, before setting up a little battle where we can see them in action. So I will lay out their troops and we shall take a look at them. So we'll start off with Dale's Infantry Contingent, and in vanilla I always likened Dale, Arnor and Gondor to be the same base, but they specialised in different things, and Dale's infantry was the weakest of the Kingdoms of Men, other than Rohan of course, because they were a little bit underpowered in vanilla, and Eriador really. So the main 3 Kingdoms of Men in vanilla, Dale had the weakest infantry. In this situation though, Dale's infantry has been improved in some areas, and we'll get onto that, but we'll start off at this end with the lower tier infantry. Now this is the Dalesmen. They technically function as regular melee infantry, despite the fact they do have 2-handed axes. Now, lower tier units such as this are not going to give you any real returns on your investment unless you combine them with something a little bit more beefy. Particularly if you're on the defense and you're up against a legion of units pouring through a gate, these guys will find themselves overwhelmed very quickly. They're clearly not the best armoured unit in the world, but it's to be expected from these lower tier units. Now the Dale Swordsmen are technically the mid-tier melee infantry of Dale, and this is again an area where they do fall a little short of their fellow Kingdoms of Men. If you put them next to something like the Gondor infantry, or the Arthedain men-at-arms, or something along those lines, they just don't really stack up as well. They don't last as long in a melee, they don't do as much damage, but they are cheaper, and that is a bit of a theme with Dale, both in vanilla and in Reforged. They do tend to get a little bit more for their money. At least you can make your money go a little further in terms of getting a bigger army, maybe a few more units of quality in there. But overall, individually, these units aren't going to be as strong as their Kingdoms of Men counterparts are. The Dale Swordsmen are probably the best example of this next to their peers. However, the Dismounted Earls are stronger than they were in vanilla, relatively speaking, next to their peers. They are now very, very good when you compare them, because I think in vanilla they did suffer a little bit next to their peers. They were similar to the Dale Swordsmen in many ways. They weren't as good as Swan Knights or Dismounted Dunedain Knights. Now, though, they are better than several of these units. It was always, in vanilla, these guys weren't even as good as the Dismounted Serpent Guard, which were cheaper and you could have more of them. This isn't the case anymore though. They are a unit of genuine quality, and it's something that Dale needs. They need a solid centre with which they can pad out their slightly more affordable, cheaper units. Moving on to their spears. Now, spears and polearms was something that Dale did reasonably well. Not quite as well as Gondor and vanilla, but they were still pretty good with them. The lower tier spears like the Hearth Watchman and the Romanian Spearmen are honestly not particularly impressive still. You can tell just from their armour and their equipment that they aren't really made for warfare, but you know, cheap spears can be used to slow the enemy down and to sort of give yourself a bit of a unit sponge. To if you put a unit of earls, for instance, in a unit of cheap spears, the earls will last longer simply because there's a meat shield with them, essentially. Don't expect these guys to get a lot of kills. They can hold the enemy up for a little while, but again, not going to hold up well to arrow fire or elite units at all. They're not even going to do very well on the cavalry charge either, because a cavalry charge will shred low tier units, even when they're spearmen. A unit I quite liked in vanilla was the Romanian Riders, and they're essentially slightly cheaper but not quite as effective Gondor spearmen. At least that's what they were in vanilla. Now Gondor, the balancing with them is a little bit skewed at the moment, but I believe that is still the intent for them. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I think it fits Dale's position of having an affordable infantry line, for the most part, with a few elite units mixed in. I feel like the Gedrouts do fit that very well. I like the helms and I like the teardrop shields as well. It fits the aesthetic of Dale very nicely. Now, something I do like about Dale, something which has been buffed significantly in my opinion, is their long spear units, their pikes and their halberds, at least their pikes. The Laketown Pikes are an all-new unit, and they are a cheap pike unit, and I like cheap pikes. I think if you use them correctly, they can make life very difficult for your enemy, particularly with the type of faction that Dale are, which is still pretty defensive, pretty archer-focused, and if you can use your cheap pikes to defend your archers, the enemy are going to have a pretty difficult job trying to get around your defences. And the Laketown Pikes I have used to good effect in the past. Of course, they are low tier pikes, so they will be put to the sword more quickly if they are outflanked, and also arrow fire will deal even more damage to them than it will to the slightly more elite pikes that they'll have on offer. But this is an area where you can save money and get a bit of effectiveness back. A unit returning from vanilla is the Halberd unit that they'll have, and that is the Barding Herd. Now, the Halberds work a little bit more differently to the pikes in Reforged than they do in vanilla. Much more of a anti-infantry focus to them, especially anti-armour. The Barding Herd, in my opinion, are one of Dale's units that can be used very well in an offensive siege as the first line through a gate. They have good armour themselves, and they will dish out a very decent amount of damage, particularly against a melee infantry shield wall. They won't do too well against a pike wall if you just charge them in, because of course they have a better range than halberds, but a good unit nonetheless. Effective against armour is really the thing to keep in mind here, but again, they won't do particularly well against cavalry charges now, even with the spear wall, so do keep that in mind. But you know, the Barding Herd were always a very nice unit to have in vanilla, and I'm pleased to say that they still are. However, when it comes to pikes, arguably the best pike unit in the game is the Avari Elder Pikemen. Now, for me, the Fountain Guard is still better because they will last longer, but the Fountain Guards are halberds, whereas the Avari Elder Pikemen are long spears, the pikes. They are extremely good. Now, it used to be they were overpowered. Their balancing has changed as the mod has developed, but I think that it's, you know, potentially I can see them in the future being maybe less effective than the Imladris Guards. And also, eventually, the Avari Elves will be their own faction, so Dale will lose this extremely high tier pike unit. But for the time being, this is an exceptional unit, and you can almost always count on a Dale player bringing them, just because of how effective they can be. It's very difficult to break through them. You have to flank them, really. Or hope you have enough arrows, but in terms of a skirmish battle, there are very few factions which can effectively, or cost-effectively, beat Dale and manage to get enough damage done to their pikes. So probably the Sylvan Elves are the only ones I'd say can reliably do it. So that's worth saying. And then we have the Shock Infantry. Now the Dale Swordsmen, Sword Masters, I should say, are a unit which received a significant buff from vanilla. Vanilla, they died off a little too quickly. However, in Reforged, they are very, very effective. They are now what they should be. They give Dale that bite, because most of their infantry units we've seen so far have a defensive focus. Whereas these guys, they will deal out an impressive amount of damage. They'll last quite a long time. And I've had them go toe-to-toe with Blackback Mountain Berserkers in the Misty Mountains, and they did decently well, although that was in a real battle situation, it wasn't in this, so there were other factors to consider. But, you know, the fact that they can go toe-to-toe with a unit of that caliber suggests how good they are. Now moving on, we have the Skin Changers, or the Unlocalized Placement Text, as they are currently. This is a unit which is still technically a sort of work in progress unit, but they are an extremely high tier unit with their extremely high attack, extremely high hit points, and extremely high cost. But for the time being, you know, just know that they are a very, very strong unit, but they are still going to be changed. You know, obviously, you can just see that from the name. And then we have the Bjornings. The Bjornings, not quite as strong as they used to be, relatively speaking, but they can hide. They're shock infantry, and they are not very well armoured, but they are still an option that Dale can field. So now we'll take a look at their archers and their cavalry, which is perhaps more where Dale's focus lies, other than their overall defensive infantry line. So Dale's archers and cavalry were always pretty impressive in vanilla, to my mind, especially the archers, and that is still the case in terms of the archers. They have a pretty good strength and depth. Now the longbowmen overall are not quite as useful as they used to be in vanilla. In vanilla they were actually a very good way of saving money, while still retaining a decent ranged force. Now though, you know, they will be outmatched in the skirmish fight. This isn't a field battle though. This is still a decent unit to use if you're defending, if you wanted to save some money for your infantry. Just keep in mind that in melee and in a skirmish fight they are not going to be all that, but still better than most other low tier archers that you can think of. Really the Sylvan Elves and that sort of faction. All of the Elven factions are really the ones to have the better low tier archers, but Dale still make a good case for that. Now the Bardian Marksmen overall were perhaps the most effective archer unit in vanilla, just because they were so... their value for money proposition was so strong. Now things have changed a little bit, obviously, there's a bit more of a focus on having elite units. Bardian Marksmen are still what I would call elite, but they are a little bit more focused on being survivable. They have a very good defense score, their armor is thick, and this means that they will do decently in a skirmish fight, but against a unit that is sort of like a general unit, for example, they are going to lose out. Still a good unit to use as your main archer force, provided you back them up sufficiently with a decent general unit. You will have a good skirmish force, which will only really be defeated in terms of strength and depth by the Sylvan Elves and a couple of others. There are some decent archer forces out there. Eriador have got a decent one, and there are a few other factions, but Dale still fall back on their archers for effectiveness quite a lot. Now the Rangers have, well, the Athala Rangers are very similar to other Rangers in that they don't last particularly long in a skirmish fight, but they are even better at mowing down infantry because they have slightly higher missile damage, and of course, you know what to expect from Rangers at this point. The Nimrodel Rangers of Gondor are the same, the Dunedain Rangers of Eriador are like this as well. So the Athala Rangers, still very effective, maybe not quite as effective relatively speaking as they were in Vanilla, but they get the job done for what they are intended for well enough. And then we have the two General's Bodyguard units. We have the Royal Guard and the Bardian Marksmen. Both of these two units are intended, you're only supposed to have one because of how effective they are. They are essentially the units which they wouldn't be out of place in terms of effectiveness in a Sylvan Elf army, but you're only really going to be having one, so you won't be able to go toe-to-toe with them. And of course they're good in melee as well. Both of them have very thick armor. The Royal Guard, of course, look like Earls, which are archers, so I really like the look of the Royal Guard. They're an awesome General's Bodyguard unit. And then finally we have the Avari Elder Archers. Of course, Elven Archers are very well known for their effectiveness. This is a very good mainline archer unit to have as well, but of course eventually the Avari units will be removed from Dale and they will become their own faction, at least that is the intent. I don't know whether they'll be part of the Vale of Dorwinion, or whether they will be just the Avari Elves. I think they'll be their own thing. But yeah, very effective. 15 missile damage is a lot. They don't have hit points, but nonetheless, I really love the way the Avari look as well. Really cool looking unit. In parallel to how the other Elven units look, I like how each of the Elven sort of sects, as it were, look different, distinct. Moving on to the Cavalry. Now, Dale's Cavalry is not particularly numerous, and nor is it as effective as it once was, but it's still decent. Now, first of all, we have the Yeoman. Really, the only thing the Yeoman are good for is attacking skirmishes and enemy siege. They're not going to do very well in a cavalry-to-cavalry fight. You can tell just from their armor that they're not really intended for this. They are very cheap, and they are pretty quick, but overall, they are a low-tier cavalry unit. And generally speaking, cavalry is an area where people like to spend their money, as opposed to save it. So the Yeoman are not going to be something you encounter all that much. Speaking of which, we may as well have a look at the Romanian Riders down here as well, because they're more of the same thing. They're slightly more effective, but it is still the same sort of thing that they will be encountering. Well, the problems that they'll be encountering. The two units that Dale were always pretty good with in terms of their cavalry were the 8th Wodia Horse Guards and the Dismounted Earls. Now, the 8th Wodia Horse Guards they're decent. They've got a good charge, and they will do the job against infantry relatively well. They will struggle a little bit in a cavalry-to-cavalry fight, especially when you come up against some of the more cavalry-centric factions like Gondor and Dol Amroth, and Rohan and the High Elves. These are the factions that Dale will struggle against, but there are factions in which you can leverage your cavalry pretty well. You know, mostly the evil factions, who won't have as high a presence on horseback, because then your charge bonuses will really come into effect, as long as you avoid some of the tricks that the evil factions can pull, especially Mordor. But the charges that the 8th Wodia get off are very good, and the Dismounted Earls, they are a unit which can hold their own in melee. They are technically melee cavalry, of course, because they don't have lances, they have swords and shields, but they will still function as shock cavalry, of course. They are very hardy indeed. A good place to put your general, if you want him on horseback. But overall, I would suggest, Dale's cavalry is something that you should only use if you're sure you're up against a faction who you can soundly beat. If you're up against the likes of Rohan, for example, don't try and go cavalry heavy, because that is not a fight you're going to win. Instead, you should probably go for archers and pikes and spears to make life annoying for them, essentially. And of course, you get access to a ballista or catapult. Nothing special for Dale, like a trebuchet or a mine or anything like that. To be expected though, because, at range, their archer force is so strong, you don't really need to give them anything in terms of siege. But that is Dale, and now let's take a look at how they perform in a battle situation. So here we are on the Romanian, and this isn't a noob box, this is just tactical geometry. Well, you get the point. Listen, I am going to be defending again, of course, and this is not going to be any sort of... This isn't really a sort of fair test, obviously, because I'm just letting the enemy charge into me, but honestly, as Dale, you're going to be playing defensively more often than not. Now, I didn't bring Cavalry, which I could have done because I'm up against two evil factions, but I decided that I would go without Cavalry because honestly, this is how I would play Dale. I play them more defensively. Now, I wouldn't noob box up as I have here because it's just a bad idea. Artillery is going to be a factor in online games, but it is something which playing more defensively is not something which is going to be coming as a surprise to people who are facing off against Dale. Now obviously the Avari Pikes are going to be here at the front, and they may be only a thin line of them, but they are very tough, and they do have 3 units of Earls backing them up. And if you look at my army composition, you'll notice I do have a lot of high tier stuff, and that's one of Dale's strengths. Individually, none of their units is going to be the best at what they do, with the possible exception of the Avari Elder Pikemen, but they will lose them eventually anyway. But Dale can field a lot of what their good stuff is. They're very much like Harad were in vanilla. They weren't going to win any individual contests, but as a unit, they were very strong indeed. Now, I'm playing against the Misty Mountains, Orcs, and Isengard. Isengard are the slightly more elite army. The Misty Mountains are made up mainly of Goblins, it must be said. But this is fine. Now, you know, the Barding Herd are kind of wasted here, in the sense that there aren't really a lot of armoured units I'm going to be going up against in terms of the Misty Mountains. But I could afford them with the money that was on offer. And that's the same money that was on offer for every faction I've tested in this manner. I was going to bring Romanian Riders as a sort of another line of defence, but I could afford the Barding Herd, and if I can afford them, why not bring them? And I was able to afford them and get all these weapon and armour upgrades for all except one unit. We're over here. So, let us see how the enemy approaches. Lots of pikes as well. The fact that I've got 2 elite pikes and then 4 less elite pikes, but still there, means that I'm able to field a very strong defensive line. And they're going to have to come to me, because going around is not going to be an option, because the archers are just going to get so many free kills doing that. So you can force your enemy into an uncomfortable situation with Dale against all but, well, you're not going to be able to do it against the Silver Elves, because they're going to be able to deal with you very well. And of course, your archers traditionally are going to be out front first, because otherwise the enemy are just going to shoot your pikes. But in this situation, the enemy will advance towards me. Speaking of which, let's speed this up. Ah, wait, my archers are actually in range now. I believe it is the Isengard army. My Royal Guard, that's where my general is. And I've got 4 Bardian marksmen. I could have brought more archers, but I decided that I didn't really want to be overwhelmed. Uruk-hai Raiders, Dunland Clansmen, there are some Nazak High. They're going to be an interesting opponent to try and take down. I have a feeling that I'm going to need to use my Swordmasters to take them down. The Barding Herd won't do too badly against them, I don't think, because they do have armour. But they're not going to win, I don't think. They are just sort of sitting in range of my archers. And I'm very okay with targeting Isengard with all I have, because of course the Misty Mountains Orcs are the fodder section of the army. There's also a lot of Uruk-hai infantry in amongst them. Uruk-hai Raiders and Dunland Clansmen make up the meat of their army. They are actually charging forward, which is interesting, but they aren't going to have an easy time of this, I fear. The Misty Mountains are charging forward as well. I think they are actually going to try and get around. If that is true, then I'm going to need to send in them. But here come the Uruk-hai Raiders. Right now my archers are just shooting my own men, which is very bad indeed. You take on them, try and shoot the Nazak-hai. You shoot the units that are back here. You shoot them. Need to make the line a little thicker, I feel. These goblins shouldn't be able to get through the Laketown Pikes in the same way my Haradrim Pikes were assaulted by the Rohan infantry last time. Okay. Barding Herd. They'll do slightly better in a cramped melee. Right, now this is bad, because the Uruk Reavers have I wasn't paying attention there. Defeat seems certain though. Right, let's get my barding herd back here. I'm going to shoot these guys point blank, which is going to kill them off very quickly. But this unit of pikemen is kind of surrounded. Unfortunate. Right, what's going on over here? Defeat seems certain for the goblin infantry. That's fine. As a matter of fact, let's charge my earls in. Try and rout them in the middle here. Shoot the Nazakai. You guys can shoot back here. Over here, on the other hand, the barding herd are tightly packed together, which is actually good in this situation. Turning it into a bit of a slog because it's something which is going to break the morale of the enemy. The Uruk-hai infantry will be slightly tougher to take down, but the barding herd will be able to get through their decent armour. As a matter of fact, what's going on here? Right, that's that unit. Okay, so we're going to need to bring my unit of archers over here, I think. Meanwhile, the Nazakai are going to just be eating arrows from my Royal Guard, which is bad for them. The Earls are going to do a very good job in melee against all of the units they've sent forward first. Over here, the Goblins are not going to be making much headway of any kind. Matter of fact, I'm just going to send these units in. And actually, I think what we're going to do is go for an all-out attack now. Try and break them. The only unit that I'm really worried about at this point is the Nazakai, but even the Nazakai has taken a lot of arrows, which means their hit points are going to have been peeled away somewhat. I'm surprised this Dunman clansman hasn't broken actually. They're wavering, but they've taken a few volleys, like point blank, and that's usually enough to take a low tier spear off the field. Over here they have done decently well, but the barding herd are there in enough numbers that I think we should be able to hold. The Nazakai are around here somewhere. Where are they? They're in here. There they go. Still taking arrows. They should commit them really, but the AI is weird. Over here they are suffering a massive break as well, so let's bring our barding herd around. Right, this unit of Bardian marksmen can now come out a little wider. Nazakai are still taking horrendous losses. My Earls have taken losses as well, but I'm not sure how much of that is friendly fire, honestly. They do have some decent units in there, not the underground goblins, but Uruk-hai infantry, and there are a few higher tier infantry units in there, I think, as well. There's some more Uruk-hai infantry. They'll do decently well, because the Earls are not armor piercing anymore. Wait a moment. We need to get around a little bit more. My archers are starting to run a little low on ammo, and the fact that the Nazakai haven't taken that many losses is a testament to how much punishment they can take, but it is also now apparent that their hit points are no more. So they're not going to be a match in melee for some of my units, particularly something like the Dale Swordmasters, who are going to be butchering units of orcs. And this unit of Dale Swordmasters is going to be pretty healthy as well. Still, my arrows fly, and they don't really have much of an answer to this. Strength in depth in terms of infantry is something that Dale do have over the Sylvan Elves in terms of an archer-heavy faction, but I would also say that their archers are not as good as the Sylvan Elf archers. The Laketown Pikes have done pretty well. This unit, which got flanked a little bit, did take a few losses. They also had to deal with Uruk-hai infantry flanking them, and Uruk Reavers, so they would have taken a bit of damage, but they did hold from the front very well, all things considered. And victory seems certain for them, and now with flanking arrow fire they should be fine. Oh my! I have a break. And it's the Nazakai, that's why. Okay. Well, while I wasn't looking, the Nazakai brought their might to bear And it was through a unit of Avari Pikes as well, so it goes to show how strong they are. But the Royal Guard, when they don't have hit points now, the Royal Guard should be able to do a decent job on them. Right, and let's get some flanking arrow fire in on them, shall we? Impressive unit, the Nazakai. They've got more mass than most units as well, so they will have the same sort of effect that trolls have actually, in that they will buckle units when they charge them. Let's go over here, shall we? I've always had a soft spot for Dale as well. Dale and Harad right now is when you're really going to start to see casualties. Yes, indeed. This section is not good. They should be pouring through here, really, but actually, you know what? Let's bring you guys out of here and patch up this line. The Avari Pikes fell before the Nazakai. Right, let's get into these underground goblins. Not going to be a match for Swordmasters, and more the wrapping around is happening. So you know what? You guys can go out over here. When the Nazakai fall, well, actually no. Let's stop shooting because the Royal Guard. Actually, you know what? Let's just get you guys into melee. Turn the screw, even though you've still got ammunition. Nazakai are a pretty quick unit as well, I've noticed. My Earls took a bit of a beating from the Nazakai, but again, that's probably to be expected. And over here, we're making some real headway. Just in case. But victory is going to be mine at this point. The Nazakai, defeat seems certain. They have done a decent amount of damage to the units they've engaged though. Real testament to how strong they are. The Earls not really made for taking on such a strong unit, it must be said, but they managed to get through the Avari Pikes as well, which is very impressive. Speaks well of Isengard more than anything else. Misty Mountains army though was really no match at all. The Nazakai I don't think are capable of breaking. The enemy general is dead. My general may die if I'm not careful though, so I'm going to bring back the Swordmasters to try and finish them off more quickly. I believe that's it actually. The Nazakai won't actually fall, or at least they won't break, so I will need to kill them to a man. But the rest of the enemy forces are running for the hills, quite literally, so that's nice. Let's get a closer look at this. Where's my general? Let's hope he doesn't get cleft in twixt by a Nazakai. He's in here somewhere. Oh, there he is. No, he's fine. He's a reskinned Dismounted Dunedain Knight with a red colour scheme, and that's good. The Bardian marksmen have taken hefty losses to the Nazakai as expected, but they were just a hit point sponge essentially to try and save my general. The folk of the ring. Strong indeed. I really like the way they look as well. Nice kill, Swordmaster. There's only one left. My general is in direct conflict with him as well. I think it might be my general that killed him as well. Nice. So there we have it. Lots of kills. Obviously it was skewed in my favour. They had no archers, no sort of mobility as such, but let's see how well our units did. Obviously the archers got a lot of kills. The pikemen got a lot of kills as well. I assume, you know, that they sent forward their crap to take on the pikes, which, while not entirely wrong, is not entirely right either. The Earls did well until they got buckled by the Nazakai. The Avari Elder Pikemen didn't get as many kills, but then they didn't seem to engage them as much as they did the Laketown Pikes, which is understandable. And you know, Barding Herd, 563. Impressive. So Dale, coming out of this looking pretty well. The Nazakai as a unit as well, coming out of this looking pretty well. Well, there we have Dale. So that is Dale, and now we will... Next up, I think we'll look at their nemesis in the Easterlings of Rune, I think. Maybe the Misty Mountains? one of the two. We'll go back to the evil factions to take a look at them next. It's actually not many factions I've got left to look at, but I will need to do all of this again when everything is rebalanced and everything is in its final state in 1.0. I think I might do that. We'll see, because I'll need to do all the unit things again then as well. But it's only Arnor, Rune, the Misty Mountains, and I think that might be it, actually, in terms of what we've got left to look at. So yes, next will be either Rune or the Misty Mountains, and then Arnor, and then the remaining evil faction. So I hope you'll join me for those videos.